The autumn sun cast long shadows across Riverview Plaza as Officer Nathan Harlow adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the bustling shopping district with practiced vigilance. Beside him, Sentinel stood at perfect attention. The German Shepherd's alert posture, a stark contrast to the casual weekend shoppers drifting between boutiques and cafes. After 4 years together, Harlow could read his partner's body language as fluently as a second language. The subtle ear movements, the almost imperceptible shifts in weight that signaled Sentinel's continuous assessment of their surroundings. A light breeze carried the scent of cinnamon and coffee from the nearby bakery, mingling with the earthy fragrance of fallen leaves that lined the plaza's cobblestone pathways. Children's laughter echoed from the playground at the northern edge where parents sat on benches beneath the red-gold canopy of maple trees. For most visitors, it was simply another pleasant Saturday afternoon in late October. For Officer Harlow, it was another shift in an unending vigil against threats most civilians never noticed. "You guys pulled that double shift yesterday, right?" Officer Elena Reyes asked, leaning against the patrol car, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun beneath her cap. "Heard you found that missing Alzheimer's patient before he reached the highway?" Harlow nodded, allowing himself a small smile as he watched a group of teenagers clustered around the central fountain. Their animated conversations punctuated by bursts of laughter. "Sentinel tracked him through 3 neighborhoods, found him disoriented behind that abandoned gas station on Westlake. He reached down to scratch behind Sentinel's ear, feeling the dog lean ever so slightly into his touch. That's another life you saved, buddy." Sentinel's service record spoke for itself: 26 drug busts, 8 missing persons found alive, and 3 department commendations for exceptional service. He was considered the gold standard in the department's K-9 unit, with a temperament that balanced razor-sharp focus with a gentle demeanor that made him equally effective at community outreach, events, and high-risk tactical operations. "How's the new vest working out?" Reyes asked, nodding toward the specialized K-9 body armor Sentinel wore. The bulletproof material gleamed dully in the afternoon light, the police insignia prominently displayed on both sides. "Still getting used to it," Harlow replied. "The department finally upgraded after Sentinel found that weapons cache last month. Chief Donovan couldn't justify keeping our best asset in outdated equipment. After that, the plaza buzzed with weekend activity parents with strollers, navigating between outdoor cafe tables, elderly couples strolling arm in arm along the flower-lined pathways, street performers drawing small crowds near the eastern entrance. Near the playground, at the plaza's northern edge, a little girl with dark pigtails played alone at the edge of the sandbox, occasionally glancing toward a woman absorbed in her phone several benches away. "You want coffee?" Reyes offered, gesturing toward the cafe across the walkway. I'm good," Harlow replied, his attention momentarily drawn to a man browsing the window display of an electronics store near the playground. Something about the man's posture struck Harlow as odd, too stiff, too deliberate, but nothing that warranted direct attention. Not yet anyway. 15 years on the force had taught him to notice these subtle anomalies without immediately acting on them. What happened next occurred with such shocking suddenness that later, when Harlow gave his statement, he struggled to sequence the events clearly. Sentinel's body language transformed in an instant from relaxed alertness to rigid intensity. Before Harlow could process the change, the German Shepherd lunged forward with explosive power, snapping the reinforced lead with a sound like a gunshot. Sentinel bolted across the plaza, a blur of focused aggression, moving faster than Harlow had ever seen him move during their years together. The man by the electronics store barely had time to turn before Sentinel launched at him, jaws clamping around his groin with terrible precision. The man's scream cut through the ambient plaza noise like a siren, high-pitched and desperate. People froze, then scattered as Sentinel maintained his grip, growling with a ferocity Harlow had never witnessed in their partnership. "Wakun, Sentinel, release! Release!" Harlow shouted, sprinting across the plaza, his commands carrying no authority for the first time ever. The man fell backward, Sentinel maintaining his grip with terrifying determination. blood already spreading across the man's khaki pants in an expanding dark stain. "Get this fucking dog off me!" The man screamed, his face contorted in agony as he ineffectually struck at Sentinel's head. Reyes reached them seconds behind Harlow, both officers grabbing Sentinel's harness, trying to break his hold without success. Nearby, the little girl with pigtails, Madison, they would later learn, stood frozen in horror, her small hands pressed over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. "Break stick in my belt," Harlow shouted to Reyes, who fumbled for the specialized tool designed for just such emergencies. Emergencies that weren't supposed to happen with a dog of Sentinel's training and temperament. The crowd had formed a horrified circle around them, phones raised to capture the chaos, the video documentation that would soon spread across social media with viral intensity. When they finally separated Sentinel from the man's body, the damage was catastrophic. Blood pulsed from the wound with each heartbeat, the fabric of his pants shredded to reveal mangled tissue beneath. Harlow pressed his jacket against the injury, trying to stem the bleeding, while Reyes restrained Sentinel, who had suddenly gone eerily calm, as if a switch had been flipped. "Oh my God!" a woman screamed from the crowd. "That little girl saw everything." Harlow looked up to see Madison backing away, tears streaming down her face before turning and running toward the apartment buildings adjacent to the plaza. A woman, presumably her mother, was pushing through the crowd, calling her name, but the girl had already disappeared around the corner. As sirens wailed in the distance, Harlow met Sentinel's eyes. The dog sat perfectly composed in Reyes's grip, showing none of the aggression from moments before his intelligent gaze, almost resolute. "What have you done?" Harlow whispered, pressing harder on the bleeding man's wounds. "Jesus Christ, Sentinel, what have you done?" And in that moment, Officer Harlow knew with sickening certainty that Sentinel's fate had just been sealed by 13 seconds of inexplicable violence. The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics pushing through the gathered crowd with practiced efficiency. The injured man, who identified himself as Richard Keller, continued to scream about lawsuits between gasps of pain as emergency medical technicians transferred him to a stretcher. "Officer, we need details," the lead paramedic said, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric. He whistled low when the injury was fully exposed. "Jesus, this is extensive." "The dog just attacked," Harlow explained numbly, his uniform pants soaked with Keller's blood. "No warning, no provocation. Nothing like this has ever happened before." "You hear that?" Keller called weakly from the gurney. "Your dog basically castrated me. I'll own your entire department when my lawyer finishes with you." The crowd had grown drawn by the commotion and emergency vehicles. Some bystanders filmed the aftermath on their phones, while others whispered among themselves, casting uncertain glances at Sentinel, who remained unnaturally calm beside Reyes. In the distance, Harlow could hear the familiar voice of news reporter Vanessa Parker, already delivering a live report about the vicious canine attack on an innocent shopper. Captain Montgomery pushed through the crowd, his expression thunderous. The captain's presence alone silenced the murmurs from nearby onlookers. At 53, Montgomery carried himself with the rigid authority of his 25 years, on the force a man who had seen everything and still managed to be shocked by the scene before him. After a brief assessment, he turned to Harlow, his voice low and final. "Officer Harlow, you're suspended pending investigation. Surrender your weapon and badge. Suri." The reality of the situation crashed down on Harlow as he complied. Automatically, his fingers numb as they unfastened his badge. In the background, he could hear Montgomery radioing for an animal transport unit. "Captain, what is going to happen to Sentinel?" Harlow asked, already knowing the answer. "Department policy is clear." Montgomery replied without emotion. "A K9 that attacks without provocation or command undergoes evaluation, but with injuries this severe..." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air between them like an invisible barrier. A specialized K9 transport vehicle arrived within minutes. The handler officer Torres approached Sentinel cautiously, clearly expecting resistance. But the German shepherd allowed himself to be led into the reinforced cage without hesitation. "Sir, we need to find that little girl." Reyes reminded Montgomery. She witnessed everything and ran off crying. Get a description and canvass the area. Montgomery nodded, and Harlow. He turned toward his suspended officer, his expression softening slightly. Go home, get some rest. This is going to be a long process. Harlow watched helplessly as Sentinel was secured in the transport vehicle, their eyes meeting briefly through the reinforced windows. The dog's calm gaze communicated something Harlow couldn't interpret. Not fear, not confusion, but something almost like certainty. As the vehicle pulled away, Harlow felt a hollowness expand within his chest. 4 years of partnership of trust, built through countless high-risk situations of silent communication that sometimes seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy. All of it potentially erased by 13 seconds of inexplicable violence. The department conference room felt suffocatingly small the next morning. Harlow sat alone at the far end of the table, keenly aware of the empty space beside him where Sentinel would normally lie during briefings. The room smelled of stale coffee and anxiety, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled department officials. Chief Donovan stood grim-faced beside a large monitor displaying frozen video footage from a bystander's phone. At 58, the chief had navigated the department through budget cuts, corruption scandals, and public relations crises with the steady hand of a career administrator who understood that police work was as much about politics as it was about protection. Before we begin, Donovan announced, I want to emphasize that this meeting is about determining facts, not casting blame. Officer Harlow has an exemplary record, as did K9 Sentinel, prior to yesterday's incident. The word did, past tense, sent a cold spike through Harlow's chest. He hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch the night before, his mind replaying the attack in an endless loop, searching for any clue to what had triggered Sentinel's unprecedented aggression. Donovan nodded to the technical officer who started the video. The footage played in a high-definition brutality, Sentinel breaking free. The targeted attack, the blood. The screaming Harlow forced himself to watch, searching for any clue, any trigger that might explain Sentinel's behavior. When the video ended, Dr. Isabella Vega from County Animal Control stood to speak. With over 20 years of experience evaluating dangerous animals, her recommendations carried the weight of both expertise and legal authority. Based on preliminary findings, she began adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. This appears to be an unprovoked Level 5 aggression incident, the most severe classification for a working K9. She placed a folder on the table, the thickness of the document reflecting the seriousness of the situation. Medical report from County General Mr. Keller has undergone 5 hours of microsurgery. The damage is substantial. His reproductive function is likely permanently compromised. Chief Donovan added, Keller's attorney delivered this statement an hour ago. My client demands the immediate euthanasia of the dangerous animal that attacked him without provocation, along with appropriate compensation for his life-altering injuries. They're asking for 7 figures. Detective Marcus Lawrence, a veteran investigator with salt and pepper hair, and the perpetually tired eyes of someone who had seen too much of humanity's darkness, cleared his throat. What about the little girl? Any statement from her yet? Officers canvassed the apartment complex. Reyes replied, consulting her notepad. Several residents recognized her description as Madison Parker, 8 years old, but they haven't returned home since the incident. Father works nights at the hospital as a surgeon, mother is a pharmaceutical sales rep. Neighbors say the father often takes Madison to the plaza on weekends while the mother is traveling. Harlow finally spoke, his voice raw from a sleepless night. Has anyone checked security cameras from the surrounding businesses? Maybe they caught something the phone videos didn't. Already in progress, Lawrence confirmed. Most businesses in the plaza use private security companies. We've submitted requests to all of them, but it's Sunday. Many corporate offices are closed until tomorrow. Dr. Vega consulted her notes, her expression professionally detached. Department policy regarding K9s involved in unprovoked attacks is quite clear. With a Level 5 incident involving severe injury, the outcome is typically predetermined. Predetermined, Harlow repeated hollowly. You mean Sentinel will be put down regardless of the evaluation? I'm afraid the liability is too great, Chief Donovan said with genuine regret. If we returned him to service, and this happened again, the department would be legally indefensible. 4 years without a single incident, Harlow insisted, desperation edging into his voice. 4 years of perfect service. Doesn't that count for something? The room fell silent. Everyone present understood the stakes, not just for Sentinel, but for the department's reputation for public trust in the K-9 program, for the precedent it would set for future incidents. Dr. Vega consulted her calendar. The review committee is scheduled to meet tomorrow at 8 or 0 a.m. Given the severity and public nature of this incident, plus the medical prognosis for Mr. Keller, a decision will likely be rendered immediately thereafter. Tomorrow. Harlow felt the room tilt slightly. That's not enough time for a proper investigation. Detective Lawrence will prioritize securing any available security footage. Donovan assured Harlow, if there's anything that might explain the Sentinel's behavior, we'll find it. As the meeting concluded, Harlow approached Lawrence, who was gathering his files. I know Sentinel, he said, his voice low and intense. He doesn't attack without reason. There was something about Keller, something I missed, but Sentinel didn't. Lawrence studied him for a moment, his expression softening. Look, I've worked with you and Sentinel for years. I know he's not just some attack dog, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we won't find anything to justify what happened. I can't accept that, Harlow replied, not without turning over every stone. Then help me, Lawrence said. Go home, think about everything you saw before the attack. Every detail, no matter how small, call me if anything comes to mind. The door to Harlow's apartment closed behind him with a hollow thud. The silence was oppressive, emphasizing Sentinel's absence from his usual spot on the worn leather couch. Photographs lined the hallway, Harlow and Sentinel at their academy graduation, Sentinel with his first drug bust, the two of them receiving a commendation after finding that lost child during the winter storm last year. What did you see, buddy? Harlow whispered to the empty apartment. What did you know that I didn't? He remembered the first time he'd met Sentinel at the regional K-9 training center. The German Shepherd had been 18 months old, already displaying exceptional aptitude, but struggling with rotating handlers. Most police dogs bonded well with multiple officers, but Sentinel had shown a stubborn selectivity that had nearly disqualified him from the program. Harlow had entered the training facility that day without expectations. Still reeling from his divorce and the death of his father the year before, he had volunteered for K-9 handler training, primarily to escape the suffocating emptiness of his apartment, to give himself a purpose beyond the mechanical routine his life had become. Sentinel had simply sat studying Harlow with an intelligence that felt almost human in its assessment. No barking, no tail wagging, just that steady evaluating gaze. You're the real deal, aren't you? He'd said quietly. Not just a tool or a weapon, but a thinker. Sentinel had tilted his head slightly ears forward, and in that moment a connection had formed that transcended the usual handler K-9 relationship. The head trainer had noticed immediately, commenting that he'd never seen Sentinel respond so quickly to any handler. Their first major case had come 3 months later, a warehouse drug bust that had gone sideways when the suspects tried to flee through a hidden exit. Sentinel had tracked one suspect through an industrial maze of shipping containers, cornering him without a single command from Harlow. The intuitive understanding between them had already developed to the point where verbal commands were often unnecessary, a partnership built on mutual trust, and an almost preternatural ability to read each other's intentions. Then there was the Henderson case. An autistic 6-year-old had wandered away during a school nature hike, disappearing into dense woodland as a storm approached. 3 K-9 units had searched for hours as the temperature dropped and rain turned to sleet. The other teams had eventually been pulled back due to deteriorating conditions, but Sentinel had refused to quit dragging Harlow through nearly a mile of dense underbrush, to find the boy huddled in a drainage pipe, hypothermic but alive. The sound of his phone shattered the memories. His ex-wife's name flashed on the screen. Nathan, I saw the news. Claire's voice was unexpectedly gentle. I'm so sorry about Sentinel. Is there anything I can do? Unless you can convince the department that my partner isn't a dangerous animal, no, Harlow replied, surprising himself with the bitterness in his voice. He's a good dog, Claire said softly. The best that remember when he found my mom's wedding ring in that park after she thought it was gone forever. Despite everything, Harlow felt his lips curl into a small smile. Searched for 3 hours in the dark, wouldn't give up. That's who he is. Claire affirmed, not whatever happened today. A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Their divorce 2 years ago had been amicable, the natural conclusion to a relationship that had gradually faded under the weight of his long hours and her corporate ambitions. They had parted as friends, or at least friendly acquaintances, bound together by 6 years of shared history in mutual respect. I still have some contacts in the media from my PR days, Claire offered. If you need help with the public narrative about this incident, Thanks, but the department's already in full damage control mode. Harlow replied, any outside intervention would probably make things worse at this point. After hanging up, Harlow poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat at his kitchen table, opening his laptop to review the bystander videos that had already gone viral. Social media was ablaze with competing narratives, some condemning Sentinel as a dangerous animal, others defending his record of service, and conspiracy theorists suggesting everything from rabies to mind control. One comment caught Harlow's attention. Watch the kid in the background. Notice how she keeps looking at that guy before the dog attacks. Something's not right. Harlow replayed the footage, repeatedly focusing on Madison Parker in the background. Indeed, there were moments when she seemed to glance nervously in Keller's direction, but the video quality and angle made it impossible to draw definitive conclusions. He opened his journal, a habit left over from the trauma counseling he'd received after a shootout 3 years ago that had left a suspect dead and Harlow questioning his career choice. Writing had become a way to process the day's events, to make sense of the chaos that often defined his work. October 15th, 2024, Sentinel attacked a civilian today, unprovoked according to every witness and piece of evidence we have so far. But I know him. I know his mind, his character, his training. This doesn't make sense. What did he see that I didn't? What threat did he perceive that was invisible to everyone else? Hui, the little girl who witnessed everything Madison was looking at Keller before the attack. Was she afraid? Did Sentinel pick up on something in her body language? In Keller's, I'm reaching for answers because the alternative is accepting that my partner, my friend, suddenly became a dangerous animal without warning or reason. If I can't find something to explain this by tomorrow morning, Sentinel will be put down. 4 years of partnership ended with a needle because of 13 seconds I still don't understand. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares of Sentinel on a cold metal table. Eyes fixed on Harlow as a needle delivered death into his veins. Silent accusation in that intelligent gaze. Why didn't you understand? Why didn't you see what I saw? Morning found Harlow haggard and unshaven at the department's K9 holding facility. The supervising officer, Rodriguez, led him to Sentinel's temporary kennel with obvious discomfort. He's been a model detainee, Rodriguez noted, unlocking the security door that led to the isolation area. Hasn't made a sound since arrival. Most dogs in his situation are stressed, barking, pacing. He just sits there watching the door, like he's expecting someone. The K9 holding facility was a modern addition to the department, built 5 years ago after a generous donation from a local philanthropist whose granddaughter had been rescued by a police dog. The kennels were larger than standard, with climate control and sound dampening materials that created a less stressful environment for the working dogs. Usually the facility housed K9s whose handlers were temporarily unavailable due to injury or family emergency, or dogs in training who hadn't yet been paired with permanent handlers. Sentinel's kennel was at the far end of the corridor, separated from the others, a precaution given his recent violent behavior. Yet when Harlow approached, Sentinel rose immediately with perfect composure. No whining, no excited jumping, just that steady, intelligent gaze that had drawn Harlow to him in the first place. "Hey, partner," Harlow said, kneeling to be at eye level. "What happened out there? Mikidwanayin. In the background, children's voices drifted from the park adjacent to the facility, and Harlow noticed Sentinel's ears immediately pivot toward the sound, his body tensing slightly before relaxing again. He does that every time kids are in the park. Rodriguez observed, gets super alert, then settles back down, almost like he's checking on them. Harlow felt something click in his mind, not an answer, but the first hint of a question. Did you say every time? Yeah, like clockwork. Hears kids, goes on alert, then stands down, almost like he's checking to make sure they're okay. Rodriguez shrugged, thought it was interesting given what happened yesterday. Harlow scrutinized Sentinel more carefully, noticing the dog's eyes repeatedly drifting toward the sound of the children playing. During their 4 years together, Harlow had observed similar behavior during community events. Sentinel's particular attentiveness to children, especially when they were separated from their parents or guardians. Rodriguez, has anyone ever brought a child into the facility since Sentinel has been here? Not that I know of. Why? Just a thought. Harlow replied, his mind racing with possibilities. He reached through the bars to scratch behind Sentinel's ears. I'm going to figure this out, buddy. I promise. Harlow spent nearly an hour with Sentinel, talking softly, trying to decode the meaning behind those steady eyes that seemed to hold answers just beyond his understanding. When he finally left the facility, he called Detective Lawrence immediately. I need to know everything about Richard Keller, he said without preamble. Not just what's in his ID or what he told the paramedics, everything. Background checks, criminal records, employment, history, social media profiles, the whole picture. Already working on it, Lawrence replied. But these things take time, and we're still trying to locate the Parker family for statements. There's something else, Harlow continued. At the holding facility, Sentinel keeps going on alert whenever he hears children playing in the adjacent park. Then he stands down after checking that they're okay. It's like he's specifically monitoring for threats to children. That's interesting, but pretty subjective, Lawrence said carefully. Not something we can build a case on. I know, just keep it in mind when you're investigating Keller. The department conference room felt more like a funeral parlor when Harlow arrived for the afternoon meeting. The department's legal counsel, Diana Mitchell, greeted him with professional detachment and slid a document across the table. Richard Keller's multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the department. The liability is simply too great. Mitchell explained, her tailored suit and perfect manicure presenting the polished image of corporate law. If we retained Sentinel and this happened again, the department would be legally indefensible. The meeting proceeded with the mechanical inevitability of a train wreck in slow motion. Various officials presented their assessments, each building the case for Sentinel's euthanasia with clinical detachment. Harlow felt increasingly disconnected from the proceedings, as if watching a predetermined script unfold from a distance. A knock at the door interrupted Dr. Vega's summary of similar canine attack cases. Detective Lawrence entered, tablet in hand, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, I've been checking with businesses around the plaza for security footage. Most of their cameras don't cover the area where the incident occurred, and those that might have partial views have 48-hour deletion cycles. With today being Sunday, most corporate security offices are closed until tomorrow morning. Tomorrow will be too late, Harlow said, unable to keep the desperation from his voice. The review committee will have made their decision by then. The conference room monitor flickered to life, displaying a video feed from County General Hospital. Richard Keller appeared on screen, propped up in a hospital bed, his face pale and drawn with pain. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, sat beside him. That animal tried to tear me apart for no reason, Keller said, his voice thin but determined. I was just shopping, minding my own business. I may never function normally again. It needs to be put down before it hurts someone else. After the video ended, the room fell silent. Captain Montgomery finally spoke. The review committee will now deliberate in private. As the others filed out, leaving Harlow alone in the corridor, he spotted Officer Chen at the end of the hallway. A 5-year veteran of the K-9 unit, Chen had worked alongside Harlow and Sentinel on numerous joint operations. I've been thinking about something, Chen said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Remember that training exercise last year? The one where the unit had to identify potential threats in a crowded scenario. Harlow nodded, recalling the elaborate simulation that had been set up in an abandoned shopping mall. Dozens of civilian volunteers playing roles while K-9 teams practiced surveillance and threat assessment. Sentinel was the only dog who consistently alerted on the child predator scenario. Chen continued, "The trainer said it was probably because you were giving him unconscious cues, but I watched you. You didn't know which volunteer was playing that role until after Sentinel had already identified him." "I'd forgotten about that," Harlow admitted. "What are you saying?" "Maybe nothing. Maybe something." Chen shrugged. "Just thought you should know, for what it's worth, everyone in the K-9 unit believes there's more to this story than a good dog suddenly going bad." The committee's deliberation took exactly 17 minutes. When the door opened, the expressions on their faces told Harlow everything. "The committee has reached a unanimous decision," Dr. Vega announced formally. "Based on the severity of the unprovoked attack, K-9 Sentinel is deemed a public safety risk and will be humanely euthanized tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. 9:00 a.m., Harlow repeated numbly. "That's barely enough time to say goodbye." Montgomery finished gently. "We're granting you full visitation rights until the procedure." The K-9 facility's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Harlow sat cross-legged on the concrete floor. Outside, Sentinel's kennel night had fallen hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not when these were the final hours he would ever spend with his partner. Sentinel lay close to the bars, occasionally pressing his muzzle through the gap to touch Harlow's hand, as if offering comfort rather than seeking it. Dr. Michaels, the department's veterinarian, had stopped by earlier to explain the procedure with compassionate professionalism. "We'll administer a sedative first, so he'll be completely relaxed and unaware. The actual euthanasia solution works very quickly. He won't feel any pain or distress." The clinical description had made Harlow physically ill. Sentinel, who had saved lives, protected the innocent, served with unwavering loyalty, would be put down like a dangerous stray. The injustice of it burned in Harlow's chest like a physical pain. "I don't understand," Harlow whispered. "What did you see? What made you break that lead?" The facility door opened, and Harlow looked up to find Officers Reyes Chen and Ortiz, fellow K-9 handlers, entering the corridor. They brought coffee sandwiches and a quiet solidarity that needed no words. For an hour, they shared stories celebrating Sentinel's career while carefully avoiding direct mention of tomorrow's looming reality. "Remember when the commissioner came to inspect the K-9 unit last year?" Chen reminisced. "That pompous jackass who kept making those stupid jokes about police mutts." Reyes laughed, and Sentinel just sat there staring at him like he was trying to figure out what species the guy belonged to. Then the dumbass dropped those budget reports he was waving around. Ortiz added, and Sentinel just calmly picked them up one by one and handed them back to him without a single command. The commissioner's face. Harlow smiled at the memory. "I thought he was going to offer Sentinel his job." These were the moments that defined Sentinel: his intelligence, his composure, his ability to read situations and respond appropriately. Nothing about the attack in the plaza aligned with the dog Harlow knew. Harlow's phone rang shortly after midnight. Detective Lawrence's name flashed on the screen. "Please tell me you have something," Harlow answered without preamble. "Still working on it." Lawrence replied, the sound of keyboard clicks audible in the background. "I've contacted the ATM service company for the machine across from where the incident happened. They're checking if their security camera might have captured anything, but they can't guarantee access to the footage before morning. Morning will be too late." Harlow said the procedure is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. "I know I'm doing everything I can. How's Sentinel holding up?" Harlow glanced at his partner, who had risen to alertness at the sound of the phone. "Better than me, honestly. It's like he's accepted it while I'm still fighting it. There's something else." Lawrence said, his voice dropping lower. "I ran Keller's name through our database. He's clean no criminal record, not even a parking ticket, but something felt off about his statement, so I dug deeper. His ID shows he moved here from Minneapolis 6 months ago, but there's no record of him there under that name. Nanoras, you know what? You think he's using an alias It's possible I've requested assistance from the FBI database text, but again, it won't come through in time. Harlow finished. Keep trying, please. After Lawrence hung up, Harlow returned to his position on the floor beside Sentinel's kennel. As the night deepened, he remained there, sometimes talking softly about their cases together, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overcame him, and he drifted into uneasy sleep, his hand reaching through the bars to rest on Sentinel's paw. He woke to the sound of the facility door opening. Morning light filtered through the high windows as Dr. Vega entered with Dr. Michaels and the official paperwork clutched in her hand. Harlow checked his watch. 7:30 a.m. They were early. It's time, Officer Harlow. Dr. Vega said, her professional demeanor tempered with genuine sympathy. We've prepared the procedure room, Kari. Harlow opened Sentinel's kennel, kneeling to secure the muzzle with gentle hands. Last walk, partner. He whispered, his voice breaking slightly as he clipped the leash to Sentinel's collar. Sentinel followed with perfect heel position as they walked down the corridor to the small room prepared for the procedure. Inside, a padded table had been covered with a clean blanket. Nearby stood a medical cart with syringes carefully arranged. The room smelled of antiseptic and finality. Harlow knelt before Sentinel, removing the muzzle to look directly into his partner's eyes. You were the best, he said, no longer trying to hold back tears. The very best. Whatever you saw, whatever you knew, I believe you had a reason. I just wish I could have understood. Sentinel pressed his forehead against Harlow's chest in a gesture so human-like it took Harlow's breath away. Then he stepped back and jumped onto the table without being asked, lying down with his typical, perfect composure, eyes fixed on Harlow with complete trust. Dr. Michaels approached with the first syringe, expression solemn. Are you ready? No, Harlow admitted, his voice barely audible. But I won't leave him. He positioned himself at Sentinel's head, hands gently cradling his partner's face as Michaels prepared the injection site on Sentinel's hind leg. I'm right here, buddy, right here with you. The procedure room door burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. Detective Lawrence stood in the doorway, breathing hard, tablet clutched in his hand. Stop, you need to see this right now. What the hell, Lawrence? Dr. Michaels demanded, syringe still poised above Sentinel's leg. Security footage. Lawrence gasped, clearly having run from the parking lot. From the ATM across from the attack site, you need to see what happened before Sentinel attacked. Harlow felt a surge of desperate hope as Lawrence placed the tablet on a nearby counter, positioning it so everyone could see. The footage showed a wide-angle view of the plaza, slightly grainy, but clear enough to identify individuals. Keller appeared at the edge of the frame, seemingly browsing shop windows. But Lawrence quickly pointed out what wasn't apparent in the bystander videos. Watch his eyes. He's not looking at the displays, he's watching the playground. As the footage continued, Keller's behavior became increasingly obvious. He would pretend to examine store merchandise. Then his gaze would shift toward the playground, focusing particularly on young Madison Parker. The little girl, unaware of his attention, continued playing with a small toy. My God, Dr. Vega whispered, her professional detachment cracking as the pattern became undeniable. It gets worse, Lawrence said grimly. While waiting for this footage, I ran a complete background check on Richard Keller. The man doesn't exist, at least not with that identity. His real name is Thomas Rayburn. He pulled out a printed report, 3 previous convictions for child molestation, recently released after serving 7 years for attempted kidnapping of a 9-year-old girl. He's a registered sex offender who wasn't supposed to be within 500 feet of playgrounds or schools. When officers searched Rayburn at the hospital, Lawrence continued, they found these in his pockets. He held up an evidence bag containing colorful candy and several zip ties. Standard lures used by predators. Harlow felt lightheaded memories rushing back, Sentinel's sudden alertness, his focused determination, the way he had specifically targeted Rayburn's groin area rather than a limb or torso as canines were typically trained to do. He knew, Harlow said, his voice barely audible. Somehow Sentinel recognized what Rayburn was doing, what he was planning to do to that little girl. There's more, Lawrence added. Madison's family finally came forward this morning after seeing news reports. According to her mother, Madison told her she ran because she was scared of the bad man who kept looking at me. Sweetie, Dr. Michaels immediately withdrew the syringe from Sentinel's vicinity, carefully recapping it. Based on this evidence, I cannot in good conscience proceed with this euthanasia. Agreed, Dr. Vega said, already reaching for the euthanasia order. With deliberate movements, she tore the document in half. This changes everything. Sentinel wasn't displaying unprovoked aggression. He was protecting a child from a predator. Harlow sank to his knees beside the table, overwhelming relief washing through him as he wrapped his arms around Sentinel's neck. The German shepherd leaned into the embrace, his tail wagging gently for the first time since the incident. He sensed what we couldn't see, Harlow said, his voice thick with emotion. All those times at the K9 facility, when he'd alert whenever children's voices came from the park, he wasn't just hearing them, he was checking on them, making sure they were safe. The department will need to issue an immediate statement, Dr. Vega said, already typing on her phone. The public needs to understand what actually happened here. Rayburn will face new charges. Lawrence added, violating parole conditions, being near a playground, possessing tools for potential abduction. Sentinel jumped down from the table with athletic grace, pressing against Harlow's side, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if he hadn't been moments away from death. There was no resentment in his demeanor, no trauma, just the steady, intelligent presence that had made him such an exceptional partner. Come on, buddy, Harlow said, clipping a regular lead to Sentinel's collar. Let's go home. The department press room buzzed with activity 2 days later as journalists jostled for a position. Chief Donovan stood flanked by Captain Montgomery and Officer Harlow, with Sentinel sitting at perfect attention beside his handler. News cameras captured the moment from multiple angles, the department's damage control efforts in full swing. Security footage obtained from the scene clearly shows that the individual in question, who identified himself as Richard Keller, but has now been identified as Thomas Rayburn, was exhibiting predatory behavior toward a young child immediately prior to the incident. Chief Donovan announced, Rayburn, a registered sex offender with multiple prior convictions for crimes against children, was in violation of his parole conditions by being near a playground area. On the large screen behind him, carefully edited portions of the ATM footage played, highlighting Rayburn's suspicious movements and focus on Madison Parker. The department has determined that K9 Sentinel was not displaying unprovoked aggression, but rather was responding to a legitimate threat to a vulnerable child. His actions, while unexpected, potentially prevented an abduction attempt. Reporters called out questions in a chaotic chorus, but Donovan controlled the narrative with practiced skill, emphasizing Sentinel's exemplary service record and the department's commitment to public safety. How could the dog recognize a predator when trained officers didn't? Called out Vanessa Parker from Channel 7 News, Chief Donovan gestured to Harlow, who stepped forward. K9 officers like Sentinel are trained to detect subtle changes in body language and behavior patterns that might indicate threatening intentions. In this case, Sentinel recognized predatory targeting behavior that human officers missed from our vantage point. We're already developing enhanced training protocols based on this incident to help both human and canine officers better identify these warning signs. Later that afternoon, Madison Parker and her parents met with Harlow and Sentinel in a small conference room. The little girl entered holding tightly to her father's hand, her eyes wide with apprehension until they landed on Sentinel. "Is it okay to pet him?" Madison asked softly. "Of course," Harlow replied, nodding to Sentinel, who understood the implicit permission to interact with a civilian. As the little girl cautiously approached Sentinel, lowered his head slightly, making himself less intimidating. Her small hand reached out to stroke his fur, and a smile broke across her face. "He's so soft, and he's the brave dog who scared away the bad man." "Yes," her mother answered, eyes glistening with unshed tears as she looked at Harlow. "The officers told us what might have happened if your dog hadn't done what he did. I was so distracted with my phone, I didn't even notice." Her voice broke. "How can we ever thank you? Sentinel was just doing his job." Harlow said simply, "Protecting people is what he lives for." Dr. Parker Madison's father cleared his throat. We've established a foundation to support specialized training for canine units to protect vulnerable children. We'd be honored if you and Sentinel would serve as advisors. The offer caught Harlow by surprise. I'd need department approval, but personally, I think it's an excellent idea. As Madison continued to stroke Sentinel's fur, her earlier fear completely replaced by admiration, Harlow watched his partner's gentle interaction with the child. There was a natural protectiveness in the way Sentinel positioned himself alert to the door opening behind them, even while allowing the little girl to pet him. "Did you know?" Madison asked Sentinel directly, as children often do, with animals assuming they understand every word. "Did you know he was a bad man before anyone else did?" Sentinel's ears twitched forward, his intelligent eyes fixed on Madison with such attentiveness that it almost seemed as though he was considering his response. "He knew," Harlow said softly. "Sometimes animals perceive things we don't. They notice patterns and behaviors that humans might miss. My therapist says animals can sense bad feelings in people," Madison said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "She says they don't get confused by words or fake smiles." "Your therapist is very smart," Harlow replied, struck by the profound truth in the child's explanation. In the weeks that followed, Harlow and Sentinel found themselves in an unexpected spotlight. The story had captured national attention. A K-9 officer sentenced to death, then vindicated when security footage revealed he had been protecting a child from a convicted predator. Media outlets framed it as the perfect narrative of justice, redemption, and the uncanny intelligence of working dogs. Harlow found himself fielding interview requests from morning shows and podcasts. Chief Donovan, ever conscious of public relations, encouraged the exposure, seeing an opportunity to rebuild trust in a department that had faced criticism over excessive force complaints the previous year. People love a hero dog story. Diana Mitchell told Harlow after their third television appearance, "Especially when it involves protecting children, it's a PR goldmine." The cynicism of her assessment bothered Harlow, reducing Sentinel's actions to a marketing strategy. For him, the incident represented something far more profound, a moment when instinct had transcended training, when his partner had perceived a threat invisible to human eyes. Thomas Rayburn was facing multiple charges, including violating parole conditions and possession of items indicating intent to commit child abduction. His lawsuit against the department had been withdrawn so quickly it seemed to evaporate, replaced by his attorney's desperate attempts to negotiate a plea deal. One rainy Tuesday morning, Harlow received a call from Detective Lawrence. "We got a warrant for Rayburn's apartment." Lawrence said, "I think you and Sentinel should be there for the search." The apartment complex was in the older part of town, a 3-story building, with peeling paint and security doors that had long since stopped locking properly. Harlow felt Sentinel tense beside him as they ascended the stairwell, the dog's focus sharpening with each step. "He senses something," Harlow told Lawrence, "something specific, our show." Rayburn's apartment was a small, one-bedroom unit with minimal furniture, a couch with stained cushions, a folding table serving as a desk, and a twin bed with rumpled sheets. The walls were bare except for a calendar featuring motorcycles. Nothing immediately suggested the darkness lurking beneath the mundane surface. Sentinel moved through the space methodically, his nose working constantly. But it was at the closet that his behavior changed dramatically. He sat suddenly staring at the closed door with unwavering focus, the signal he had been trained to give when finding contraband. "There shouldn't be drugs in his file." Lawrence frowned. He wasn't a user. When they opened the closet, they found nothing unusual among the hanging clothes. Sentinel remained fixed, however, his eyes directed at the floor. "Check for a false bottom," Harlow suggested. Beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered a plastic storage container. Inside were dozens of photographs of children playing in public parks, at school playgrounds, and swimming pools. Each image focused on a specific child, often zooming in on faces or specific body parts. Interspersed among the photos were handwritten notes describing routines, names, and locations. "Jesus Christ," Lawrence whispered, pulling on latex gloves to examine the contents. "This isn't just about Madison Parker. He's been stalking multiple children, A separate folder contained newspaper clippings about missing children from neighboring counties, alongside what appeared to be hand-drawn maps with locations marked. "We need to cross-reference these with open cases," Lawrence said, already photographing the contents, "and get forensics in here immediately." As the search continued, they found a hidden compartment behind the bathroom mirror containing children's hair ribbons, small toys, and a notebook filled with disturbing fantasies. In the kitchen tape behind the refrigerator was an envelope containing a detailed plan for abducting a child from Riverview Plaza, complete with escape route and a cabin location in the state forest. Harlow watched Sentinel move systematically through the apartment, indicating several more hiding spots where evidence was recovered. The dog worked with the focused precision that had made him exceptional, but there was something else in his demeanor, a determination that seemed personal, almost like righteous anger. "How did he know?" Lawrence asked quietly as they supervised the evidence collection. "How did Sentinel recognize what Rayburn was when none of us did?" "I've been thinking about that," Harlow replied. "Remember that training exercise last year? The one where we had Sentinel practice finding kids hiding in the abandoned school building?" Lawrence nodded. "There was this moment. I've never mentioned it in any report because it seemed too subjective. But Sentinel refused to enter one particular classroom, just planted himself at the door and wouldn't go in. Later, we found out that room had been used by that teacher, arrested for having inappropriate material on his computer." "You think Sentinel can smell predatory intent?" Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly." Harlow watched as his partner systematically checked under Rayburn's bed. "But I think some dogs might recognize patterns of behavior. We miss micro-expressions, subtle body language, physiological responses that happen when someone is fixated on inappropriate targets." As they left the apartment, evidence bags carefully labeled and sealed, Harlow felt a weight settle over him. The realization of what might have happened if Sentinel hadn't intervened. How many children had Rayburn already harmed? How many more might have suffered if not for those 13 seconds of violence in the plaza? The evidence from Rayburn's apartment connected him to 3 previously unsolved disappearances in neighboring counties over the past decade. Cold case detectives from multiple jurisdictions descended on the department, reviewing the evidence and interviewing Rayburn, who had begun cooperating in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The media narrative shifted from heroic dog saves child to something darker and more complex, the story of a serial predator finally caught because of a canine's unexpected intervention. Public fascination with Sentinel grew, his image appearing on everything from local news segments to national magazine features about working dogs. Through it all, Sentinel remained unchanged, the same steady, intelligent presence at Harlow's side, executing his duties with the same quiet competence that had always defined him. If anything, he seemed more attuned to his surroundings, more vigilant when children were present in their patrol area. "The department's implementing your training proposal," Captain Montgomery informed Harlow one afternoon as they walked through the K9 training yard. "K9 units across the state are asking for copies of the protocol. You've started something important here." The protocol, officially named the Sentinel Recognition Protocol, incorporated training exercises designed to help K9 units identify subtle indicators of predatory behavior. It emphasized allowing dogs to communicate concerns that might not align with handler objectives, creating space for their intuitive responses to be taken seriously. "It's not about turning canines into some kind of supernatural predator detectors," Harlow explained to a group of handlers during the first training session. "It's about recognizing that they perceive things differently than we do, and sometimes those perceptions matter more than our assumptions." The training yard buzzed with activity as handlers and their K9 partners worked through scenarios designed to hone their detection skills. Sentinel demonstrated the behaviors for the other dogs, showing a precision that impressed even veteran handlers. The way he could distinguish between actors playing ordinary civilians and those instructed to mimic predatory behavior seemed almost uncanny. "It's like he can read their minds," Officer Chen commented, after Sentinel successfully identified the undercover officer playing a child predator in a crowded simulation. "Not their minds," Harlow corrected, "their bodies. The way they move, the micro-expressions, the patterns of attention." We're just teaching the dogs to recognize what they already perceive. 6 months after the plaza incident, Harlow received an unexpected visitor at the canine training facility. Dr. Parker Madison's father stood at the reception desk with Madison half hidden behind him. "We hope we're not interrupting," Dr. Parker said. "Madison has been asking to see Sentinel for weeks. Her therapist actually suggested it might help with her recovery process." Madison peeked around her father's eyes, immediately finding Sentinel, who sat in perfect form beside Harlow. The dog's ears perked forward, his attention completely focused on the child. "He remembers you," Harlow said, gently kneeling to Madison's level. "Would you like to say hello to him?" The girl nodded, stepping forward cautiously. Sentinel remained perfectly still, allowing her to approach at her own pace. When she finally reached out to touch his fur, he lowered his head slightly, the gesture almost like a bow. "He saved me, didn't he?" Madison asked quietly, looking up at Harlow with eyes that seemed older than her years. "From the bad man?" "Charyon." "Yes," Harlow replied simply. "He did. I knew he was watching me." Madison continued, her small fingers gently stroking Sentinel's head. "The bad man, I could feel it, but I didn't know what to do. I was scared." Dr. Parker placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We've been working with her therapist on understanding that what happened wasn't her fault and that it's okay to tell adults when someone makes her uncomfortable." Sentinel knew, Madison said with the simple confidence of a child. "That's why he bit the bad man." "Yep," Harlow agreed. Sentinel knew. The visit lasted nearly an hour, Madison gradually becoming more comfortable, eventually throwing a training ball for Sentinel, who retrieved it with gentle precision each time. Her laughter, probably the first genuine laughter since the incident, echoed through the training yard. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Parker handed Harlow an envelope. "It's an invitation," he explained. "Madison School is having a Safety Awareness Day next month. They're teaching children about recognizing dangerous situations and finding help. We'd be honored if you and Sentinel would attend." The school visit became the first of many. The Sentinel Recognition Protocol expanded to include a community education component, with Harlow and Sentinel visiting schools to teach children about personal safety and the importance of trusting their instincts when something felt wrong. The program resonated particularly with children who had difficulty articulating their feelings or who struggled with traditional social interactions. Something about Sentinel's calm presence and non-judgmental attention created a space where vulnerable children felt safe enough to share their concerns. At one such presentation, a quiet 7-year-old approached Harlow afterward, carefully ensuring no adults were within earshot. "The man who drives the library van takes pictures of us when we're changing for swimming," he whispered. "He says it's our secret game." The information led to the arrest of a library employee who had been systematically photographing children at multiple schools throughout the district. When investigators searched his home, they found thousands of images and evidence of distribution to online networks. The success of the program attracted attention from law enforcement agencies across the country. Harlow found himself invited to conferences and training seminars, always with Sentinel by his side, and demonstrating the techniques they had developed together. The foundation of this approach, Harlow explained to a room full of K9 handlers at a national conference, is trusting that our partners might perceive threats we miss. It's about creating space for their instinctive responses, even when those responses don't align with our human understanding of a situation. One evening, nearly a year after the Plaza incident, Harlow sat in his living room reviewing case files. Sentinel lay on the couch beside him, head resting on his thigh. The television murmured in the background, a documentary about animal cognition that Harlow had been half watching. Some animals possess what we might call a specialized moral intelligence. The narrator explained, an ability to recognize intentions and behaviors that threaten vulnerable members of a social group. This protective instinct transcends species boundaries in remarkable ways. Harlow glanced down at Sentinel, who returned his gaze with that same steady intelligence that had drawn them together from the beginning. In the year since the Plaza incident, they had helped identify 8 more individuals targeting children, some through Sentinel's direct alerts, Others through the expanded awareness the program had created among officers, teachers, and community members. You know, most dogs get a special treat or a new toy after doing something exceptional. Harlow said conversationally, "You got a death sentence and then a media circus? Hardly seems fair." Sentinel's tail thumped against the couch cushion. "Then again, you've probably saved more lives in the past year than most officers do in their entire careers." Harlow scratched behind Sentinel's ears, feeling the dog lean into his touch. Not bad for a dog who almost flunked out of the program for being too selective about handlers. His phone buzzed with a message from Detective Lawrence. "Rayburn's sentencing tomorrow. Prosecution recommends multiple life terms, no possibility of parole. Justice such as it was, not the vengeance some might have wanted, but the certainty that Thomas Rayburn would never again pose a threat to children." The Parker Foundation for Child Safety had grown beyond anything Harlow could have imagined, with branches in 3 states and a comprehensive program that combined KTing detection training education for children and parents and support services for survivors of abuse. Madison herself had become something of a spokesperson, her natural resilience and courage inspiring other children to speak up about uncomfortable situations. The rain that had been threatening all day finally arrived, drumming against the windows and sheets. Sentinel's ears twitched at a particularly loud thunderclap, but he remained calm, secure in the familiar territory of home and partnership. In the morning, they would return to their patrol duties, walking the same plaza where everything had changed. A year earlier, children would ask to pet Sentinel, and parents would tell them in hushed voices that this was the hero dog from the news. Some would take photographs, others would simply nod in solemn acknowledgement of what had been prevented that day. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of their apartment, there was only the steady rhythm of shared breathing, the wordless communication that had become the foundation of their partnership. No medals, no ceremonies, no official recognition could match the simple truth of this moment. 2 guardians resting together, ready to stand watch again when morning came. Harlow closed the case files and turned off the television. Outside, the storm continued its percussive symphony against the windows, but inside there was only peace, the hard-earned tranquility that comes from knowing exactly where you belong and exactly what you're meant to do. "Good night, partner," Harlow said softly, turning off the lamp. In the darkness, Sentinel's tail thumped once against the cushion, an acknowledgement, a promise, and a quiet affirmation of the bond that had transformed them both. The connection that had saved not just Madison Parker, but a Sentinel himself, and perhaps even Harlow in ways he was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. For now, however, the Guardian could rest secure in the knowledge that his vigil had not been in vain, and that when danger threatened again, as it inevitably would, he would recognize it even if no one else could. In that simple truth lay the essence of their partnership, and in that partnership, a model for something greater, a recognition that sometimes the wisest course was to trust what couldn't be explained, but could be felt, the instincts that transcended language and linked sentient beings in the ancient pact of protection and survival. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, giving way to the quiet stillness of night. Inside, Guardian and Ward slept peacefully, their shared mission temporarily suspended but never abandoned. The world, with all its hidden dangers and unexpected heroes, continued its rotation toward dawn, toward whatever challenges the new day would bring, and toward the possibility, always present but never guaranteed, of justice